Well, Michael, thank you so much for joining us. I know you're a busy guy, and I'm really excited to have you on our show because a lot of our audience is now aware of mold issues or potential mold issues. We talk about it a lot on our podcasts and channels. I deal with a lot of really chronically sick people where mold is at least one of, if not the major driver they're dealing with. So, first of all, thank you so much for coming on. Why don't you tell our audience a little bit about who you are, how you got into this world, and then we'll dive in from there.
Yeah, first off, thank you for having me and for having this platform and educating people. It's so desperately needed. With respects to mold, this is a global epidemic we're dealing with, and we have to get this under grips as quickly as possible. How I got into this is very interesting. My father's been a restoration contractor since I'm 5, primarily fire restoration, and so I've been around construction of homes pretty much since I'm a kid. And with that being said, after Hurricane Sandy, I moved back. After I went to college and Hurricane Sandy happened, I moved back home and I'm working for my dad's company. And that's when I started to notice a pattern of people complaining of illness after this hurricane hit. And for me, it was the first time that I ever really looked at our homes making us sick. That it didn't really make sense to me because, only viruses and bacteria can make us sick, right? That's what you kind of learn growing up. And after about the 20th person, it just became blaringly obvious that there's something here. And what's interesting about these homes in particular is they were already remediated, supposedly, right? So they had companies come in, their insurance company came in and supposedly fixed things and blah, blah, blah. But the scientific information that we're looking at through lab results is telling us that this house is far from fixed, but it looks fixed, right? And that's where things really started to kind of confuse me a bit. And as I started going through this, I said, well, let's start opening these walls and checking these issues because the science tells us there's a problem. And what I'd found behind the wall was shocking. The front of the wall looks perfect, just like the wall behind me, right? But as I open it up, you find all kinds of crazy stuff growing in there. And that's when I really started to mess around with MSQ PCR technology. Many of us might have heard of the term ERMI before. And largely, this is around when ERMI kind of first came out. And only the first study that the EPA had done on this was published at that time. And so we're all looking at a score and we're trying to improve a score. Later, we found out that actually the score is kind of imperfect. And we want to pay more attention to the data and then use the data to make decisions on how do we improve it. And that's really what transformed into me creating a company that goes in, helps people identify problems, helps people solve problems, and create healthier environments to thrive in.
Okay, so a lot of questions that are there. First of all, well, let's hit the elephant in the room. So a lot of people are they always ask me, what's the best way to test? And I've always said, look, you can do an ERMI test, but from my understanding, from what I've seen, a lot of it depends on the quality of the practitioner. It's not like a simple, we run your blood test and you have something or you don't, or like a urine mycotoxin test, right? Like it's how well do they do it? Do they miss parts of the house? And it can be expensive. So you've developed I guess not a better test. It's just a more, I guess, early test, right? Like you can do this that then leads to an ERMI. So run us through that and then what you would do if that was positive.
All right. So I helped develop a test. And the reason being is because the tests at hand are conducted by laboratories that have no clue as to what the data means. They do not know how to improve that data. They just know this is what the data is. And so everyone was buying ERMIs for however many years, and the problem with it all was nobody knew what to do with that data. They would take it to remediation companies. Remediation companies look at it and be like, I don't know what this means. This is not an acceptable practice. This isn't industry standards. And they would just write you off. They take it to doctors and doctors would be like, well, the score's pretty high. That you got to run from that place. You got to do something. But what is that something, right? That's always been a big confusion. They take it to inspectors. Inspectors don't know what to do with it, right? So we've gotten this situation where the data was too far advanced of the people that can interpret the data. And so I said, we have to fix this because actually this technology is the absolute best way to screen for problems in the home. And so we came up with a concept. We called it the dust test. It utilizes the same technology that ERMI does, but it improves upon the technology by helping you understand and interpret the data. And furthermore, it helps you empower having that data and then taking it to somebody and saying, look, these are the problems that I'm observing here in my house based upon the existing studies, which we've also included the second study the EPA did with this test. And now we're able to understand if this is normal, abnormal, if how elevated is it really. And we can say, okay, well, these 3 or 4 species are extremely elevated. I need to figure out where they're coming from. Now the customer is empowered to take the data and do something with it, right? The other thing is every single time a dust test is sold, it comes with a free consultation because we're not a lab, right? We outsource it to a lab, but we have a whole infrastructure of people that understand the data and can guide them to the next steps. And so it is the first consumer-based product that takes this information that they can get it at home by themselves and get the support they need that follows up with what that data means and what do I do next. And so this was kind of the way I wanted to revolutionize the technology and put it in the hands of people. Now, why is it a better screening tool than other technologies? Well, as simple as this. The only other technology that people could use for screening would be air testing. But here's the problem with air testing. You're collecting 75 milliliters of air. It's like me taking a drop of blood from your body and saying, I know everything about that body. It's impossible, right? So they're taking a drop of air, essentially, in an ocean of air, and they're interpreting that one drop as if you have a healthy home or not. Now, what might be the problem of that? Well, let me tell you why. We all remember COVID, right? What did we learn from COVID? Particles typically travel 3 to 6 feet from the source point that they emanate from. Okay. So let's say an average room is 10 by 10 in size. Let's say I test in the center of the room. That's about 5 feet away from any potential problem. Because where are the potential problems, folks? Whether they're on an exterior wall or an interior wall with plumbing, right? Somewhere where there can be a water source. So testing in the center of the room, now I'm 5 feet away from it. And you know what happens when I collect 75 milliliters of air 5 feet away from a problem? It's going to be just so slightly elevated to the point where I'm going to think it's pretty normal, guys. No cause of concern here. And this happens test to test to test, home to home to home. I do expert witness work to help litigators really defend against people that are harming other people and things of that nature with respects to this. And I just got a report yesterday, and the report was one report showed that there were pretty extensive issues at the home. And then the opposite side gets another report and just takes air samples in the center of the room and says, no issues here. But even that report is hilarious because the question is, if there are no issues here, why is one room twice as high as the other room? If there are no issues, because all they're trying to do is compare one data set with another data set and not looking at the whole set of data in conjunction with the totality of the home. And so as we can see the faults with air testing and how it's used, it's not a good screening tool because we would really need to test probably 4 or 5 times the amount of tests that we do as an industry standard to get a really good sense as a screening tool of what's going on. Now, why dust? Because MSQPR technology typically tests the dust. Why is that? Because anything going on in our home, whether it's behind a wall, whether it's behind a ceiling, whether it's in an HVAC system, these particles that are emanating from these points, they're going to attach to dust particles that are already in the air. I'm breathing in tons of dust right now, guaranteed. And if you've ever sat near a sunny window, on a sunny day, if you ever sat near a window on a couch or something, and you saw that ray of light refract off the dust and you realize, oh my God, there's so much dust in my air that I'm just consistently breathing in, you'll get this understanding. Our dust is everywhere. These particles attach to our dust, and then our dust circulates around our house. So we get a really good average of what we're being exposed to if we collect dust randomly from different parts of the house and send that in to be analyzed. And that dust also means that you're breathing that stuff in because, well, we know that our dust is in the air and it's everywhere and we're breathing it in. So therefore, it's a much, much, much better screening tool than trying to take air samples.
And it's really easy to do, right? I'm sure it comes with Well, I know it comes with the instructions on how to do it, but why don't you run everyone through what a normal dust test process would look like?
So it's going to look like a Swiffer cloth that comes in a vacuum sealed package. You're going to open it. It comes with gloves. You're going to put gloves on just in case someone makes an argument that your moldy hand or something, contaminated the sample. You're going to put these gloves on. You're going to take this Swiffer cloth. You're going to go around to various parts of your house and you're going to collect dust. You're going to wipe up dust with the Swiffer cloth, just like you would if you were cleaning, right? And the goal is you want to collect dust from different rooms across the house because you want to get an average of what you're being exposed to. Now, it doesn't tell you where the problems are coming from. It's not meant to. It's meant to first answer the question, do I have a problem?
Mm-hmm.
Because when everybody hires a mold inspector for the first time, which happens all the time, right? That's actually the first question they're trying to answer. Do I even have a problem? Is this even impacting my health profile? And for this, for the first time, they can actually get an accurate result to answer that question. And then, of course, we'll guide you. Yes, you may need an inspector after the fact, but now we're more targeted. Now we're saying, sir or ma'am, I need you to help me find where these 3 problems are. And if they tell you, oh, I don't think I can do that, well, then you call somebody else. That's the beauty of, having Google and being able to have competitors in the business. You want to find somebody who you feel is going to care about you. Just like if you had a problem with the body and you went to a doctor, you want to find a doctor that's actually going to care about you, that's going to fight with you and not just say, I ran the same tests I always run and everything looks normal, so go to somebody else. It's not what we want.
So then from the dust test, let's say it's positive. Like you said, that doesn't tell someone where the issue is because they're not doing a part of the Swiffer per room and labeling that, right? They're just collecting multiple parts of dust. But at least then you can tell the ERMI inspector, this is what we've got. I'm paying you to find it, right?
Totally. Yeah. It's like you now have a proof that there is a problem. And now you're going to take that proof to somebody and you're going to say, are you the person that can help me figure out where this is coming from? Yes or no? It's no longer, I want you to come in and take air samples to tell me that my house is fine or isn't fine. I now want you to take this data I already have. I already know my house has some elevated issues that I want you to then help me discover. It becomes a different conversation because now you're vetting somebody not for their opinion. You're vetting somebody for their ability to help you. And where people typically start out on this journey is they actually start making calls to hire people for their opinion. But we don't want opinion when we have fact. We want their help. And it just becomes a whole different process. And now we're empowering people to be their own experts and their own advocates to help investigate who's the right team to help them.
Well, what you're really doing is you're taking away the problem that a lot of us face. Like, for example, I don't really know anything about cars. If I take my car to the mechanic and they tell me I need $1,000 worth of work, I don't know if I'm getting ripped off or not. Well, it feels like that with a ERMI inspector. Either they tell you, no, you're all good, or you've got all these problems and maybe you don't. It's nice you can now say, look, there's mouse droppings in the house. So we know there's a mouse somewhere. Well,
right.
So then what are people looking for when they find because now you're going to show those facts and a good ERMI salesman is going to say, oh yeah, we can definitely help you find that. Is there anything in particular you've found that shows whether this person knows what they're doing or not before someone commits, a bunch of money to testing?
Step one, if they tell you, oh, I don't recognize that technology, I'm going to come in and do my usual inspection and take air samples, and you say, no, that's not the person for you. Now, if somebody says, oh yeah, wow, I could see based upon the data, you have high levels of Stachybotrys or Aspergillus. Yeah, let me come over. Let me take my moisture management tools. Let me try to identify exactly where this is coming in from. Instead of taking an air sample in the center of the room, I notice you have a problem by your window. Let's actually take an air sample from behind the wall and let's see what's going on around that window, right? Let's get a good sense, because then you can take data and correlate it with data, right? So what would be a huge waste of money is if you got a dust test and then you do the dust test, you find that 3 mold species are elevated. And then you hire somebody and then they come and take air samples in the center of the room again. and they tell you, oh, I can't find where those species are coming from. Huge waste of money, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like one of the craziest things about this industry is nobody tests HVAC systems. It's like, why not? Every HVAC system has an evaporator coil that constantly condensates. So what do we know about condensation? Well, it's water. What do we know about mold? Likes water, needs
Mm-hmm.
water. What do we know about bacteria? Likes and needs water too.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, perfect spot for this stuff to grow. Yet nobody is swabbing the coil to see if the coil is contaminated. Blows my mind because they just want to take air samples.
That's asinine, isn't it? When you say that, if you made me guess where someone has mold in their house, I'd look for water damage on a wall or a roof, and I'd look around vents and HVAC. And I'm not a construction guy. I know nothing about it. And yet, so you're telling me that the standard ERMI tests, they're not even doing that. They're just standing in the middle of the room and going, let's see what the air is like here.
Yeah, exactly.
That's insane.
It's like testing for a brain tumor in someone's stomach and being like, all looks really good here. And you're like, this doesn't make any sense. And I can't explain it. It's one of these things where when I ask people like, why does this happen? Right? People in the industry, the answer is it's just the way it's always been done. And I'm like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. Okay. So if I start cutting off people's feet to save their hands, and then that becomes the way it's always been done, then it makes sense. It's supposed to make sense, right? Apparently, according to that logic. But it actually doesn't make sense. It never made sense. What really happened was it was a new cool technology, and logically it makes sense in the term of if I want to check my air quality, I test my air.
Mm-hmm.
But what people are missing, this whole scientific community, by the way, is missing, is that you're not actually testing the air. You're testing for particles in the air, right? And then when you look at that, then it becomes more about, well, let's check for particles. Where do particles typically end up? The same place dust ends up, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now the logic actually makes way more sense in not only theory, but in application as well when you dissect the two apart, because it's not the air that gets contaminated. It's the particles in the air, right? And that's how we have to understand this.
Okay, so if you were going to do a new career and you were going to be an ERMI inspector, and I called you into my house and I had the dust test positive results, and we'll talk a bit later. People will be able to, you can go to the show notes and there'll be a link to be able to get the dust test. We'll make sure that's in there. But if you were to come to my house, so you would probably still do an air test, but if you stood in the middle of the room, then I'm going, no. You would go to where you think there could be areas. You would swab places that are high likelihood of having mycotoxins. Is that fair?
Yeah. So when I come to your house, first thing I'm going to say is, are you aware of the history of the property? Are you aware of any water damage events that may have occurred? And you might tell me, yeah, you know what, 5 years ago, my dishwasher leaked, but it was taken care of. I had the best of the best out, and they did all these things. They're like, cool, we're gonna test there. Yeah, I had a couple leaks in the basement. Good, we're gonna test there, and we're gonna test on top of where we think the problem is, so we get a better reading of data because we know that particles don't travel very far. The other thing about air testing is it's meant to trap very tiny particles, like between 2 and 4 microns in size, right? Dust is much bigger than that. Dust is not going to fit in this cassette. Therefore, we're missing all the spores that are attached to the dust, right? Which they become a part of the dust. So we're only getting isolated spores, which the further away you are, the less likely you are to pick them up. And that's where we have this other issue, right? So I'm going to be testing as close to where I think there might be a problem as possible. As a matter of fact, if I think it's behind your wall, I'm going to actually drill a hole through your wall, stick a tube through your wall, and pull the air from behind the wall to get an understanding of what's actually there. And we're also going to use surface testing, because you're going to tell me this one time my vanity drip was just a drip. No, it wasn't a big deal. There's the stain. There's no mold. As you can see, it's just a stain. I'm going to take a swab. I'm going to test that stain, because what looks like just a stain sometimes could be growth. Why? Because certain species of mold are lighter in color. So if it's white and we have a natural cabinet color inside our vanity, which we typically always do, going to be very hard to see that visually. That's where surface testing might come into play. I'm also going to probably bring some sort of thermal imaging camera, because I'm going to be looking for what are things you don't know about. Like maybe your ductwork's condensating. Maybe you don't have enough insulation in this one spot in your home and it's condensating in there and you have no idea, because the front of the wall looks great, but the back of the wall might not be. And I'm going to probably then also test on the usual suspects like basements, crawl spaces, attics, kitchens, and bathrooms, just to get a sense of, are there problems that might be behind the tile that we can't see, right? And this is going to give us a clue as to what's going on in our environment. And then, by the way, when we get those results in, we can then correlate it with the dust test. And we're going to see, that's where the Stachybotrys is coming from. That's where the Aspergillus is coming from. And of course, we're going to test the HVAC, because I already harped on that, right? So
now people listening to this, like, I already feel way more educated. If I had an ERMI inspector walk in tomorrow, or I was looking for one, I feel like I could call them and ask them questions and say, so tell me about your process. And they say, well, we collect air. And I can ask, well, where do you do that? And do you use a thermocam? And do you do surface testing? So I guess with a good inspector, if someone's asking that stuff on the phone, they're not going to have any problem answering that before you even bring them out, right?
I would imagine so. And if they have a problem answering it, then they must have something to hide, right? So I would just be like, okay, this person's not for me. I think, as you can see, I just outlined what my process might be if I walked into somebody's house, right? And it should be easy for anybody to do that off the top of their head if they really know what they're doing.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. That alone is worth the time people have given up to listen to this episode. So you said some other interesting things in there. And as I'm thinking about my house, I mean, our house was newly built in 2018. So you don't think of it as having mold, unlike the house I grew up in that my parents are still in, that was built in the 60s, that's by the beach in Australia. And I now know, looking back, that there's definitely mold there, because we all had mold symptoms and my parents are getting worse while they live there. But I look at my house, okay, 2018, yeah, shouldn't be any mold damage. But I think about when we put the reverse osmosis filter in and the guy didn't put it in properly, and we did have a leak, quite a big leak under the vanity. But of course, they cleaned it, and we don't think twice about it because there's no visible mold. So they're the kind of places where you would have someone, I mean, in a dust test, would you go there as well? Like, that would obviously be a good place to check.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you're going to collect dust from everywhere, right? You're not going to skip that room.
Yeah.
And I think you're going to notice if there's an elevation. And that would probably be the first thing that comes to your mind, is like, yeah, we had that leak. That was what I know of. It's really interesting because, so many of us, we have these things happen throughout, owning a home or even renting a home, right? And we just like trust that it's all taken care of properly, because we don't really know that mold grows in 24 to 48 hours. And we don't really understand that two surfaces touching one another can trap moisture, kind of like a wet sponge sitting on top of a kitchen counter, right? The area underneath that sponge, when you lift it up, even 2 days later, what happens? It's wet under there. How is that? Because it traps the moisture, because two surfaces are touching one another. We don't think about these things, right? So when our vanity gets wet and it's touching a floor underneath it, that floor and vanity underneath it stay wet far longer than everything around it. And these are the types of things that happen to us, and we trust the people that we hire. And I'm not saying like everyone's malicious, but the people that we hire are not necessarily as educated as we might think. And so we get into this situation where, unfortunately, we're hiring people that we think are experts that are really not that well educated in what they're doing, that give us bad information. So we just say, okay, well, they must know what they're doing. There's a lot of assuming here, as you can see. And then all of a sudden, a year or two down the road, this little problem from this little leak is like this gigantic issue now that's been growing in our kitchen, unbeknownst to us, this entire time, or our bathroom, right? And now it's all those particles and toxins that it's been creating over 4 years.
Yeah.
Now I've been getting into the HVAC, and now the HVAC is, forget it. It's a mold factory. And then we wonder why we're getting sick, and there's no easy way to solve this problem other than we all have to advocate for our own ourselves. There's just no other way to do this. And so you really should feel comfortable that you have someone that has your best interest. You should feel comfortable that they're knowledgeable and really know what they're talking about, that aren't just telling you things to appease you, but actually are telling you things that are factual. And doesn't hurt to second guess it and verify.
Well, I think what's even worse than that, it's getting to that point. I've got mold issues that I've been working on in my own body for a while. I work with a lot of patients who do. And I think of all the times you talk about two surfaces trapping moisture. I'm in Omaha, so it gets cold in the winter and you get condensation on a window that drips down into the windowsill, and you might catch it every couple of days and you just wipe it up. And I mean, I should know better. And I don't even think about, well, there could be mold that starts because you don't see it. And of course, in the human brain, you're like, oh, I'd see it if there was mold there. I sometimes leave a wet sponge out. My wife's always on my case about that. And I hate to admit that she's probably right that we shouldn't do that. But it's so easy to not even get to that point where it's bad enough. I think I need a professional. You see it on a vent and people just wipe it off. And how many times are they exposing themselves to maybe black mold, some nasty satrotoxin, and they just didn't even think about it. If I'm silly enough to do that, I'm sure others are. So I think that education piece of someone like you reminding people that, look, don't do that. And also, is it worth doing maintenance dust tests? Like, do you do one once a year on your house or anything?
Yeah, I do. And I recommend that everybody does, because our houses change over time. And, the only way we can be aware of problems that we're not aware of is by looking for changes in our environment that make us start to look for problems we're not aware of. And I'll tell you, like, that is the biggest issue. Gwyneth Paltrow is one of my clients, and I went to her house. It's a magazine house. It's amazing, right? And when you look at it, you think, can't possibly have mold, right? Can't possibly. So then we do some data to understand, is the environment as healthy as it could be? And we found crazy levels of mold in places she spends the most time in all of her HVAC systems. And it was like, no wonder why, she's not feeling well, right? Like, this is not good. And you have to look for it. It was underneath her bathtub, right? Underneath. Now, you can't look underneath your bathtub. You have to physically pick it up, right? So these are all hidden problems. And I think one of the misconceptions is that, my house has to be like dirty and like wet, to have mold. And your house can be wet behind the walls and you don't know that it's wet. Doesn't have to be dirty. You could clean 100 times a day if you want. But if there's still particles and stuff growing from places you can't see, guess what? It's creating that impact for you. And, I want people to know, like, I know the wealthiest people in the world that have had mold issues. I know the cleanest people in the world that have had mold problems. They didn't know about them. And, obviously you see this every day, right? You've dealt with mold symptoms yourself. You deal with mold symptoms in patients. Mm-hmm. They don't know. If they knew 5 years ago, they would have looked for you instead of going to 10, 15 different doctors before they found you.
Yeah.
If they knew, they would have tested their house with the dust test and checked before problems became a big problem, right? And that's where this awareness and education needs to come into play, because, people go through this stage of disbelieving it. Like, there's no way this can't be it, right? And then they go through that denial curve, and then they've tried everything, nothing's worked, so this is the last stop, and they're going to go for it. And then they're like, holy crap, my house is really not a safe environment. And then they go through that grief stage of like, okay, now I got to deal with this, and it's really hard, and I have to, decide what to keep, and I have to invest money in fixing this place. And then they finally go through it and they start feeling better, right? Along with your protocols and your programs, and all of a sudden they're like, wow, this is amazing. Everybody should know that. But we have to remember that there's all these people that have yet to even go through that curve at all, that think we're probably all nuts, right? Yeah. Why is that? Well, we said it before. If you don't see something, you just don't think it's real, right? And people forget that you don't see air either, but you realize that's real.
Mm-hmm.
And what did it take for this paradigm shift? You know what it took? Because I've been doing this for 11 years. Nobody was talking about it the way they are today. You know what it took? It took COVID. Why did it take COVID? Because it was the first time many of us realized there's something so tiny out there that we can't physically see that can make us sick by being in the same room as the virus itself.
Mm-hmm.
Mind blown, right? Well, mold's just like that, except the virus is in your walls, not in each other.
And it's growing at a rapid rate. So,
yeah.
If Gwyneth's magazine TV house, with who I'm sure she has more professional cleaners than us normal people have, if that can have mold, I think that should settle the debate for everyone that they could have mold. So do you think if someone doesn't have much or really none, or they've got things fixed, is annual probably a fair amount to just do the test, do you think?
Yeah, I think we want to look at, we're supposed to maintain our house annually, right? In most cases. And that's checking windows and doors. You have a good window and door professional come out every year, just double check the windows and doors, make sure all the seals are good, all the waterproofing's good. That's a really smart thing. We want to check our roofs, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have storms that roll in, right? They knock shingles loose. We want to check and make sure that our roof isn't vulnerable. We have vent pipes that come out of our roof with rubber gaskets that break down over time. We want to check those. These are all things we want to do as on an annual basis, because the house moves, shifts, things change over time. And another thing we should be doing is the dust test, right? As part of our annual maintenance. I know probably half the people listening are like, oh my God, I haven't checked my roof in like 5 years, or nor my windows and doors, right? And they're all freaking out. And it's like, yes, we have to do that more regularly, because if we don't, then we're in reaction mode instead of proactive mode, right? And being reactive to things in the home is 10 times more expensive than being proactive. I promise you. So we want to kind of shift that mindset, and the dust test helps us do that on the inside of the home.
It probably adds to the value when you want to sell your house too. If you can show, hey, my house has been mold free, and it's with real data and factual that it's mold free.
Go in the toxic mold support group right now and say, I got a mold free house. Here's my dust test.
Yeah.
20-30% more value. Yeah. There is a market for it, and it's a growing market, right? Because more and more people are being aware of their environment. More and more people are investing in healthier homes. They're investing in, all kinds of air purification technologies. They're investing in low VOC and green building options. Like, this is a movement that has slowly but surely been moving across this sector. So there's no doubt that it helps raise the value. And just like selling anything, if you sell to the perfect buyer, you get the perfect deal. Well, if you're investing in this and it's important to you, it's not going to be that difficult to find someone else that's important to them when it's your time to move on from that place into another place. So especially if time's on your side, it's only going to keep moving in that direction, because we're starting to wake up that we have never been sicker than we are today. Like, factually, 60% of the global population deals with at least one chronic condition. 70% of US adults on one prescription drug, a 14% increase since 2019. Crazy stuff, guys.
Yeah.
We are waking up to the fact that our environment is probably playing a bigger role than we think.
So what do you think from what you've found? Now, obviously, the results will be skewed a little bit because people who are testing probably more likely already have an issue. But if you had to guess, and I know it's hard to generalize this, but what percentage of homes do you think are dealing with mold issues? Like, is it more 3/4? Is it half? Like, what do you think?
Wow, great question. I'd say at a minimum, being conservative, 80% of homes have at least one mold issue. 80% of homes.
80%.
I think it is absolutely ridiculously rare to find a home that doesn't have an issue. As a matter of fact, in the dust test, out of the thousands of people that have bought it so far, I can tell you of 2 conversations that I've had where I told the person, I'm actually stumped at how low everything is. So whatever you're doing, keep it up. And they're like, and these people were like, I check this every year. I do this. I do like crazy upkeep on their environment, which is, not the average human being does. So and yes, most people, they either buy the test because they are sure they have a problem, their doctor's sure they have a problem. So my data set's going to be skewed. And of course, people that are just aware of the science and want to be sure that they're staying that way. The largest home survey ever done in 1994 by John Spengler showed that 80% of the homes that he surveyed had visible signs of water damage. That's 1994.
And that's just visible.
That's visible. Yeah. So that is just visible. All he did was a visual inspection. 50% of those homes that had water damage had visible mold problems. Visible. So large data set. And I suspect things are going in the wrong direction, not the right direction, based upon what I'm seeing in the field. The energy efficiency push has done great for energy efficiency, has done horrible for human health. Just point blank. Why is that? Because now to make matters worse of an already complex issue, we are now breathing in less quantity of air from outdoors. So going back to that particle discussion, that means more particles accumulating in our environment, and there's no fresh air exchange to dilute the amount of particles that are there. So our house fills up like a balloon with toxins, chemicals, formaldehyde, VOCs, radon, you name it. Everything you don't want to be breathing in high concentrations. And then guess what? We're get stuck breathing in high concentrations. Yeah. So, thinking about all of this, we really need to start putting human health above everything else. And if we do that, then we can figure out ways to improve energy efficiency without sacrificing our health, which is where we need to go, and quickly.
Wouldn't that be nice? So, okay, someone tests positive on the dust test. They find out they've got mold. What do you recommend they do about it? So obviously, if it's bad, you've either got to get it remediated or you've got to get the hell out of that house, right? But there's different levels. I assume virtually every test, as you even said, these people have very low levels who are looking after the house, but there's still going to be, I think there's going to be mycotoxins everywhere, right? Like you're never going to be perfectly blank. But if someone has minimal mold versus maybe medium versus serious, what's your steps on what they should do in each of those categories?
Yeah, just to make sure people aren't confused, 0 is unobtainable.
Yeah,
it's an absolute. Absolutes you could just not obtain. Now, we can obtain normal ranges, and so let's say I see a test from somebody, and these happen sometimes where a test comes in and it's super low. Guys, keep doing what you're doing. Keep the place clean, keep changing filters, keep doing what you're doing. Everything's perfect. Okay. Oh. That's probably less than 1%. Now, what's the more likely conversation is, all right, guys, we have a couple things slightly elevated. All right. What I think you need to do is upgrade your HVAC filter. My guess is this has just been growing in the HVAC system over time. Upgrade the filter to something that can block out tiny particles like mold, like bacteria, like toxins. It's going to make a big difference.
Sorry, Michael, when you say upgrade, so I've got a friend of mine in HVAC who laughs at me because I buy the $30 or $40 air filters for my filter instead of the cheap $8 ones. Is that what you like? Even just
yeah, so like upgrading your MERV rating. So maybe you have like a MERV 8 filter for $1, and maybe getting a MERV 16 filter and investing in that would be a significant improvement, right? The highest you can get in a residential setting is going to be 16. 16 is going to cost. 16 is an investment because you'll need to basically install an apparatus to house the filter. But essentially, once you make that investment, you'll never look back because it's just the best thing that you can have. And it gets down to 7 nanometers in particle size. And so, if you are worried about other particles besides mold or besides bacteria that might be smaller, like viruses, then this is something that you can invest in. Just that alone, cleaning the system, cleaning the ducts, installing the filters, that is maybe 10 to 15% of my conversations. Okay. We're house is not that far off. Let's do this. Let's see what things are like. Okay. But the large majority of my conversations are like, okay, there is a problem, and this problem is not great. And this is where I'm starting to see millions of particles per milligram of dust, Just millions of things growing inside the HVAC system, various problems across people's home. And it's not their fault. It's nobody's fault. It's this lack of education, this lack of awareness, and 40 to 50 years of just bad maintenance and restoration. That, again, they bought the home. They're the third owner now, and they don't know what those other two people did. And they always relied on professionals for everything they knew about. And everybody relied on these professionals that really didn't understand what they were actually doing. And we get into this situation where I now have to fix 40 to 50 years worth of issues in a project, which, you know, it sucks to be in that position because it's not a cheap endeavor to renovate your house and fix 40 to 50 years worth of issues. But, you know, when we're working with people on limited budgets, which is pretty much everyone, maybe except Gwyneth Paltrow,
Yeah.
we're looking at data, right? And we're utilizing data and we're saying, okay, well, these are the worst areas contributing to the particles and toxins that are inside the environment. Let's fix those. And these other things that are minor in comparison, let's not disturb them. And, you know, we know about them. We'll monitor them over time. If they get worse, of course, we'll have to make these game time decisions. But for right now, let's use data to make the investments that we can afford to make, because we can't afford not to do anything.
Yeah.
And that's the key.
Well, you're going to spend more on your health anyway. I look at what it costs people even when we catch it early. So a good ERMI inspector, mold inspector, builder, they're going to be able to help you go, look, if here's your limited budget, you must tackle this in this area. We can probably just watch this. Is that, if you've got a good one, is that who you're really leaning on for advice?
You could, if you have a good one. And that's hard to find. I know if you have a good one and they really understand the data and can interpret it, they could probably help you put together a plan of, all right, these are the worst areas. Let's focus on this. These other things don't matter as much. Let's not worry about that right now, because we have a budget to work with. Right.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's something that I do every day for every client. It's what
so
are you?
People can use you if they do a
Totally.
dust test. Okay.
Totally. Yeah. Because that is what I do every day for people. And it's one of the most important pieces, because we don't have money trees that grow in our backyards. You know, we've heard about them, but I've never seen one. Right.
No, me neither. Me neither.
And, you know, and the cost of construction has gone up just astronomically. Interest rates have gone up. Hard to take out loans to do stuff now. Right. And so we really have to be creative to take control of our health and our environment without making costly mistakes. And one of the biggest costly mistakes you can make is making decisions based upon opinion instead of data. Yeah. And I see that all the time.
Okay, so someone tests positive, they're working with you because they're smart and they go to the best. They have to do some stuff to fix it. In the meantime, open windows as much as possible. If it's
dilute the amount of particles you're breathing in by exchanging the air.
Yep, it's 0 degrees in the middle of winter here in Nebraska. You're still going to have to just put the coats on and get some fresh air in, or get outside for a bit. Air filters, I assume, like we have one or two decent quality Austin air filters in the bedrooms. I assume that helps, if nothing else. Do you need HEPA filters? Like, what else can people do when they know they're sick? And I tell them, if they can't move out of their house, they've got to get it fixed. Windows open. Give them everything else they can do.
Yeah. So air purifiers, for example, you know, big hot topic of contention, right? Air purifiers don't solve a problem, but what they do is reduce the amount of particles that you're breathing in.
Right.
So having one versus not having one is going to make sense, especially while you're transitioning to figure out how to find the problem, how to eradicate the problem, et cetera. Mm-hmm. It's also going to reduce the amount of particles that are falling to the floor, becoming part of the dust. And why is that so important? Because we already know that dust that is coming into our body with the 20,000 breaths that we take each day. Mm-hmm. So what else can we do? We can hyper clean. We can clean a lot more than we normally would, so that we're having as little dust in our environment as possible. We can open up windows, get fresh air circulation. You can take a box fan, put it on your windowsill, point it outside, and start drawing air from inside and pushing it outside and get all those particles with it. You know, I think these aren't perfect solutions. Perfect solution is find the problem, eradicate it, remove all the contaminated dust, you're home free.
Yeah.
But it sounds easy. I know I just made it
Yeah.
sound like incredibly easy.
Yeah, real simple. Yeah.
But it takes time, it takes money, and it takes putting together the team that knows actually what they're doing and how to do it. And so there's going to be a lull in you finding out your house is a problem and you getting it fixed. And so you got to take some steps that you can possibly take to get some improvement in the interim. And these are the things that you can do easily.
What do you recommend for cleaners? Because I know some cleaners will pretty much make the problem worse, right? When you say hyper clean, what do you want people to do?
So for this exact reason, I put together some really inexpensive bundles on homecleanse.com. People can, it's like microfiber towels, microfiber mops, Decon 30, which is a botanical disinfectant with a surfactant to help minimize the amount of dust that they're constantly breathing in. So I would say get your hands on one of those bundles, to be frank, because then you have everything you need and I don't have to explain all the different grades of this or that. But essentially microfiber is going to be much more effective than anything else you can clean with at trapping these tiny particles. The other thing that's really important is we want to reduce the amount of toxins we're exposed to. That's going to include chemicals. We don't need chemicals anymore. Yeah. Bleach doesn't do anything, by the way, guys. It's not effective at removing mold. It's effective at bleaching mold. So if you want to, give it a new color, great. But it's not going to kill it. It's not going to eradicate it. We want to use botanical products, and the surfactant is the real superhero, along with the essential oils, at helping to remove. One of the things we always think about is like, let's just kill. We want to kill viruses, kill bacteria, kill mold, kill this, kill that. No. We just want to remove it from our environment. We want to remove it and remove the accessibility for us to be exposed to it. That's it. It's that simple. And you can do that with all natural stuff.
Brilliant. Yeah, we'll have a link for everyone listening in the show notes. Just you can click on the HomeCleanse link and we'll have that bundle there as well. You know what we should do, Michael, is once I send my dust test in, we should have you on for another episode and you can live break down everything that's wrong with my house so that people can see how that works and tell me all the crap that I got to fix up.
Totally. Actually, that would be an amazing idea and I would love to do that.
Okay. Well, I'm going to hold you to that because I would really like to have you do that for everyone to see how it works so they see this is real. And even those of us who are aware and in this industry still make all the same mistakes and deal with the same problems. So, look, you are such a wealth of knowledge. I'm excited to have you back on to do that. Anything that we've missed that the audience needs to know?
I think we've covered the foundation of the basics of all of this, which I think it really makes the most sense to cover. I hope that anybody who's listening can really get an understanding of each segment where we talked about different things. They can break that down into some gold nuggets to use for their advantage so that they're in control and not listening to opinion, but listening to fact. And I think that is what we need right now. And of course, I'm happy to come on and go deeper on any little specific pathway we want to go on, and happy to continue to be a help for people and a source of information for people.
Well, you're amazing. And what you're doing is hopefully going to transform the world. So thank you for sharing some of your time with our audience, Michael.
Thank you very much for having me.